Thank you, Alfonso. Thank you very much, Alfonso. I listened to that board exam talk and I thought, wow, you know, flashing back 50 years, it seemed like about a month ago that I took my board exam. And what a tension situation that was. They, at the end of it all, we had to appear in this room, and they read from the list of the people that passed, and it was Adams and Ainsworth and Barker and Barnes and Rockstein and Campbell and what? They skipped me. And I thought, oh my God, my world has ended. However, they picked me up and decided I passed. I was so happy. And then I became an examiner, and I thought, wow, that was just really great. And I did that for several years, and it was so educational. Some of those people knew so much more than I did, and I was examining them. But anyway, I'm a legend. It's so amazing. I looked up in the dictionary what a legend is, and it turns out that a legend is some kind of a historical figure whose prowess may or may not be credible. And I thought, okay, I'll accept that. So I'm happy to be a legend, and I'm happy to be here. Well, I'm happy to be here in San Antonio, but I'm happy to be. Just happy to be, because I reflect back, you may have heard that I was kind of sick. Well, this is what I looked like in February of last February. I had Staphylococcus aureus septicemia. Well, when I was in medical school or as a resident, I think that was fatal. And it was a bad deal. This was all over my whole body, including my liver and my kidneys and my lungs and everywhere else. It was just awful, and I was super sick. However, and also I looked back later on and went to the internet and found out that a 70-year-old person had a 15% chance of living, and I'm 83. And I thought, wow, I'm so glad I didn't go to the internet before. I'm so glad. So you can see, I'm happy to be here. And I'm walking with this cane, but the good news is that I'm going to let this cane go in about another week or two. So I've graduated from the walker to the cane, and now cane's going to go in another couple of weeks. So thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. Now, the prologue to all this is my grandfather's house. Now, the reason is because my grandfather lived about 4 or 5 hours east of here, which is now about 30 minutes east of here by I-10. And like all families, we would gather there at Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving and various other times when the various cousins and aunts and uncles would come. And we would have this big dinner, and my grandmother would cook it off of a wood stove. And I can remember sticking the wood into the stove. And I remember going out to the back and getting a chicken and watching her swing it around here, and that was the chicken. But they were fantastic dinners, and the dinners were beautiful. Every meal, however, somebody came and knocked on the door, because my grandfather was a physician. Then somebody came and knocked on the door with some kind of a problem. And I thought, wow, you know, there's something about that I really like. And that was when I became convinced that I wanted to be a doctor. I don't know how old I was, 6, 7, whatever time memory begins. And I never thought of ever doing anything else other than being a physician. So this is it. So over 50 years evolution, I'm the same guy, absolutely the same guy. I've got a little less hair, but I've got the same basic desire to be a good guy, and I have the same vulnerabilities, and I'm the same guy, just more mileage. Now, I've had so many mentors. I've had thousands of mentors. Everybody I come in contact with becomes somewhat of a mentor to me. However, I have to start, with Dr. DeBakey. Dr. DeBakey was a dynamite mentor. Anybody in here was a DeBakey resident? Yeah, well, you know how it was. Dr. DeBakey taught me how to work. How to work. You say, work 80 hours a week? No, 3 months. 3 months you were on Dr. DeBakey's service, you didn't leave the hospital. And I was as close to Dr. DeBakey as I am to Alfonso all day long until he went to his office. And when he went to his office, I did all sorts of stuff, waiting for him to come back around 6 or 7 o'clock. And it was just fantastic. And he was so great. The nicest thing he said to me during those 3 months was, get out of the way. However, I met him at a party about 30 years later, and I very politely introduced myself to him and reminded him that I'd been his resident back X years ago. And he said, "Oh, Tom, those were the days, weren't they? Those were the days when we did this, we did that, we did the other." There was a lot of we's in there. And I said, "Yes, sir, it really was." So Dr. DeBakey was a dynamite influence on my life. And then comes along Dr. Cronin. Now Dr. Cronin was born looking old. And Dr. Cronin, you agree with that, Berkeley? He was born looking old, and he walked old, and he talked old. Dr. Cronin, however, his way of going about things was, okay, let's take a look at the problem. What's the problem? And how can we fix the problem? What can we do? And that's what he did with every single case, whether it be a little mole he's going to remove, or whether it's going to be a great, gigantic reconstructive process. What's the problem, and how do we fix the problem? And I remember those words over and over and over again for years and years and years. When I finished my residency, I went immediately into the United States Air Force because that was the way it worked in those days. All docs had to be in the military. So I was on the general surgery staff because I'd been a general surgery resident for a while, and also chief of plastic surgery. It was great being the chief. I was the only plastic surgeon, but I was the chief. So I operated all day, every day. It was just great. And I had this case. And when I saw this case, what do I say to myself at the very beginning? What would Dr. Cronin do? What would Cronin do? Well, he'd say, well, let's take a look. What's the problem? Well, the problem is the breasts don't look the same. Why don't they look the same? Well, because the right one is ptotic and it has some lack of parenchyma in the medial aspect, and the left is a little small. Well, okay, so let's do a mastopexy on the right. We did, I did. I didn't have any help. I did, but yet still was a problem because they weren't the same size. So we put in the implants. This is 1964, so these are brand new implants, 62 is when the first ones were used. So I got this, and I got this, and I went from there to there, and that was 1964. And that was what would Cronin do? It was what stimulated me in that case. Now, Mel Spira. How many people know Mel Spira here? All right, well, you'll appreciate this. I met Mel Spira on July the 1st, 1959. And I was a first-year surgery resident. I was in the emergency room, and day one, I had a big slash on the cheek of somebody, so I needed to call the plastic surgery resident on call. So, plastic surgery resident on call, yes. Oh, the doctor, this is Dr. Spira. Dr. Spira, Dr. Biggs in the emergency room. I have a patient down here with a facial nerve cut and a carotid duct. And he said, okay, I'll be right there. So he was up in the doctor's lounge on the 11th floor. So I said, okay, and I turned around, and by God, there it was. And I said, you were on the 11th floor? I said, yeah. I said, that elevator, chug, 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 chug. No, I took the stairs. And that was when I met Mel Spira. And he had an open and uninhibited enthusiasm. And I saw him last year. He still has it. It's just wonderful. So he was a fabulous mentor. He was 3 years ahead of me in plastic surgery, and consequently, he's the guy that I spent most of my operating time with. Ivo Pitangui, I went to Brazil 43 times, and almost every one of those times I was in Rio, and I spent either a dinner or a lunch or a cocktail or something with Ivo Pitangui. And he just died about 2 weeks ago, and I've written 4 obituaries. He just died about 2 weeks ago, and he was a fabulous, fabulous man. He was fabulous for a lot of reasons, but the one that was most fabulous for me was that he taught me how to treat people. The very first time I met him, we were invited to his house for dinner. And there was about 6 or 8 people at this dining table, chairman on board of this, chairman on board of that, big time people. And throughout the entire evening, he referred to me. What do you think, Tom? You agree, Tom? Tom. He made me feel like I was a big shot. I was a very little shot. But he made me feel good about myself. And every visitor I've ever had that has come to see me, I've thought of how Ivo Pitangui treated me. So I have to class him as one of my major mentors because he really did make an influence on my life. Now there's been Don Collins. Don has been with me for 25 years? Don now? 25 years. We've never had an unpleasant word together, ever. I thought Don Collins may well be he's an excellent surgeon, a tremendous physician, and he's probably the nicest person I've ever known in my life. I thought that maybe he was something dishonest about him for about 3 or 4 years. And then I began to realize it's true. Then I met his brother and his mother and his father. It's all the same. Just super nice people. Don Collins. Well, and then Ben Cohen and Ernie Cronin. Ben took over the residency from Ray Brower, and I was so happy it wasn't me, because he knew the literature much better than I did, and he was much better administrator. He did basically everything better than I did. And it was just wonderful to have him run our residency program. And I think that we prospered greatly under Ben Cohen. And then there was dependable Ernie Cronin, just solid, steady. Now Ernie's going through a little bad time right now with malignancy, but I remember he was always reliable and always good. And actually, I had him do a couple of things for me, on me, take a thing off my nose and so forth. He was dynamite. And it was always nice around the corner to have Bruce Smith, just to know that old Bruce is there. And he was always there around the corner. So these people have served as my mentors. And then there's the residents. The residents have been tremendous. I'll say more about them later on in the talk. But the residents, back in the olden days, 5 or 6 years ago, we would have 100 applications, we would interview 20, and we would take 2. So all these people came to us with tremendous backgrounds. They knew a whole bunch of different things. Gary Bronfman was a photographer. We also had a guy who was a jet pilot in the Navy off aircraft carriers. We had tremendous talents that came into our lives, which just was wonderful. So they've got to be included as mentors. Well, Roger Curry, I'll say more about him tomorrow, but long story. Roger Curry called me several years ago and said, "Oh, Tom, you got to come help me. You got to come help me." Roger has a little attention deficit, what do you call it, ADD, and he doesn't concentrate on one issue very long, and he doesn't really like writing. I said, "What are we going to do?" He said, "Well, you need to write. We need to write. I've got so much stuff we need to write." So I spent a week, a month, for several years, 3 or 4 years, at Rogers, and I was with Roger, and wow, did I learn a lot from Roger Curry. About everything I know about fat grafting, I learned from Roger Curry. Sid Coleman started me off, but Roger Curry is the one that took it. Now, let's rest a second. The sun began rising on my plastic surgery life in 1958. That's when I finished medical school and rotated in the plastic surgery service at the University of Wisconsin. Well, we did cleft lips and we did cross-leg flaps and talked to the patients. Well, yous done the best yous could. Not you all, but yous. And it was nice. I loved it. That's when I decided to go into plastic surgery, because I fell in love with plastic surgery. I wanted to do all I could do. Just to operate was just a wonderful experience. Now, but the sun is now setting. Sun does set, and like all love affairs, it kind of begins to fade as time and experience passes. And that's been the way it has been with me. I stopped operating several years ago, and I don't miss it, really. I have other things that I'm involved with, which I'll tell you about in a second. But the lengthening shadows of my life don't lie. And the lengthening shadows tell me that it's probably taps for me. Ba, 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 ba. You know that. It's probably taps for me. Taps. Taps? No. It's Reveille.